Good evening. Evening. I think I've met everybody, but it's good day, Trexler. And I want to thank Julia for inviting me here, and we're going to do a little presentation on how we developed the Trexler family history book. And what I've been asked to do is to address what inspired the book, what resources they used, were there any stories that stood out, and were there any surprises? And then we're going to end with the California network, where Charles Lewis Trexler came from Pennsylvania to provide that. Well, as far as inspiration, the first thing that happened was when I was young, we got a book called Trexler Family and Related King by John Warren Trexler. Got a copy over here. And what it did was take, at that time, the earliest that they knew was 1720, and listed every name that they could find that was related to Trexlers that came over, and John Trexler. And he took that, and they had a convention in 1901 where they, a reunion basically, where they put all their family Bibles together and made a list of all these people. Then John Warren, about 1972, took that list and sent postcards out and expanded it, so it's getting all about the parents, siblings, born, died, married. So that was pretty much it. Then my mother, June Harvard Trexler, put together for her family it was a lot of information she gathered, but she put it together in a scrapbook form and photocopied it and gave it to her children, grandchildren, and nieces and nephews, which was kind of a neat way of doing it, because it's kind of like a scrapbook. And then because of that, she also had a pile of information for the Trexlers that she had put together, but she had gathered and asked questions, relatives, and got stories and that she had compiled. And one of the things she had in there was a message about Palestine, and I thought it was a Middle Eastern region, and found out that there's also another region, Germany, called Palestine. And because of that, I got a book called Becoming German by Philip Ottoman, and I learned about that whole Palestine movement, and I really became interested in it. And the pamphlet that my mother had was written by Hank Jones, and Hank Jones was someone that just wrote extensively and gathered all sorts of detailed information for all the families, and he went back and for some of them, he even tried to trace their relationship with each other and find out which ones might have come from the same villages and everything. Unfortunately, he didn't do it for the dress. They were called Dreslers then. And then I thought, well, I would go and try to put something together. Then while I was at we had a place up north, and during the week I went to the Alexandria Bay Library, and I was looking just for a book to read, and I saw this book, and the name of was Palestine Roots, and I knew that it just perked my interest, so I picked it up and I read it. It told the story. It was not a novel. I think people read a novel that was based on facts, but this was the facts that kind of made the story. And the woman was Jean Dixon, and She was from Clayton, New York. And in those days, you could look up the person's name in the phone book at Clayton. It was just a text story. They all said their name and went, and they got a second copy from her. That I'm determined that would put this all together. And as I did, and as I did with each chapter, I took a chapter and I emailed it to my brothers, to my cousins and all my children. And I thought that's pretty much it. After that, my other brother, Connecticut, Bob Trexler, said, well, you ought to publish this. And I said, sure. And he said, no, I'm serious. He said, I really not interested in doing it. This is, it's kind of hot. And he said, oh, no. I said, I'll do it for you. They have all these publishing things, and he published a number of books, and George McDonald and C.S. Lewis, in Society since born, to publish a book project for some other people. And I'll go for it. Wow, okay, all right. But this week I got it all written. Well, I didn't realize that he had to start all over again and do it. But he has been a real inspiration to me. He's taking down, he's picking up with the research and everything else. We just keep finding new things, and it's great. It's just like here, when you bring things to us, we've got new stuff that just kind of fills in the gaps. So that's pretty much what inspired it. Sources, and I've got a copy of these down here for anybody that might be interested. But probably the most important one is to ask every relative you know, particularly the older ones, anything that they know, stories, history, anything they hear, whether they know that it's right or wrong, just because you have the basket full of clues that you can go looking for. And the other sense, newspapers, historical groups, and enterprise associations, there's just a million of them. And you can look at all sorts of ways. The one thing is that really found to be okay for clues and that, but not terribly reliable, was Facebook and the internet, because if you've got that information, some people tend to just copy it. And so you may see it 30 times, so that doesn't give it authenticity. It doesn't think I repeat it 30 times. So when we started, we knew that we started in Germany in Bettingen, and there really wasn't any interest, just a little village there. And the village is right here. The only reason we had somebody was there was a battle of Bettingen. It's about 30 years after they left. It gives us a flavor between two walled cities. And this was the royal hunting grounds up there, so we know what this was. All that battle also was the last battle that an English king led their troops on the bed. So with that, we just off the internet takes some pictures of a couple of buildings built when John Trexler was there, and this is a current picture of the death. This would be Germany, and I have ample beer. It's hard to describe. But it comes from this region, gone down the Rhine to Rotterdam, and they went down because they were people went up and down the Rhine and promised them 40 acres of land and tools that the Queen of England would give them if they would just go and settle in the New World. So about 30,000 dead. Of that number, about 15,000 men ended up in in England. Some got turned back, some got discouraged, but and there was all over the world. Can you see that all right? We started to get the first recorded information when we looked at passenger lists, and it says we learned we get a lot of information. We get the information down here that John Peter Trexler, he was 28. He was traveling with a wife and one son. We also learned that they came to England in May, somewhere in there, May 2nd, 1709. And we know that he was one of the first ones to go because he ended up at St. Catherine's. And we learned also that he was a husbandman, farmer, and a vine dresser. Probably did the vine dressing part of his name. So we took that clue, and we looked at now St. Catherine's, which was the Royal Hospital at that time, and each one of these groups, they probably landed down here at St. Catherine's. Over here was large green, and that large green, then they would put all these immigrants in camps, and once this was filled up, they found another green, and pretty soon they found warehouses, and the next thing they needed to find was a place to ship them, because they didn't know where to go. So about they had almost 30,000 went to Ireland, a large number that went to Scotland, some went into the countryside of England, some went into military service, some got turned back. The Queen never promised them that. It was land speculators for the people that were given land in the United States. They needed people to occupy it. So as and this is what those camps would look like. At one point, the Port of Trade in England came up with a great idea. What to do with the people? They said, we're buying tar from Norway and Sweden for our ships and for our boats. Why don't we take a group of these people and we'll send them over to the New World, and they can make tar, and we won't have to buy it from them, and we'll get rid of these people. So they did. They sent about 3,100 of them on 10 ships across. They left in December of 1709, and this would be a typical ship where they would house. It would be housed right here in what's called the tween deck. And if you divide 3,100 by 10, 310. Actually, it was a little more because the governor went and he didn't have any of the bell things on it. But that area there was about 25 feet wide and about 120 feet long. So they were really cramped and crowded in there. They left in December. They sailed down to the coast of England. And they sat there waiting for the British Navy to give them an escort because they were at war with France. And the British Navy wasn't too interested in getting them. So they sat there from December to May before they actually left the shores of England and came to the United States. When they did, they arrived in New York. And of the 310 that went, approximately 639 died at sea, and only 2,477 arrived. Now that number is a little mixed because of probably a few more died because they estimate about 50 to 60 babies were born during this. So and not all of them made it, but that's the total number that arrived. And once they got there, they were very ill. They've been on board ship for over 6 or 7 months, and in crowded conditions. So we know that the governor paid for at least 250 coffins to bury them where they quarantined on New York. New York wasn't interested in seeing them. They had almost 3,000 of them. The population in New York City at that time was about 5,000. So it was quite an invasion. But they went to upstate New York to make tar. And they would go, see this man. They were down in New York City, they came up into this area. In Germantown, was now Germantown, New York. And this flag, it's a flag for them. There were 2 camps, East Camp and West Camp, and each side of the Hudson. And the Treslers were, you can see that they were in the East Camp. And there's a lot of records because they were basically indentured servants, and the government was subsidizing them for working and making tar. The project failed for 3 basic reasons. One, the British didn't know how to make tar. And the second one was that the Germans didn't want to make tar. And the third reason was that the vast pine forests in the Hudson River Valley weren't suitable to make tar. So they soon disbanded, and part of them went to the Canada area, the Colesville area, where they farmed for about 10 years. And then they lost that land because the Dutch said that the Indians sold it to them first, and so they had to move. Some went to the Utica area, and others went into Pennsylvania, the central Pennsylvania, the Pulpinagan with Conrad Wiesner. Got a little ahead of myself. The Trexler, however, it appears that they stayed in New York. They went a little further down south to Poughkeepsie because we find them on the tax rolls down there. They just simply left. And so there must have been tenant farmers. They paid their taxes down there. We also know that one of their children, daughter Margaret, was baptized just south of Poughkeepsie because the baptism records give the house and the location where the street that goes into the Hudson, and it also lists the godparents. And the godmother for Margaret was also the Conrad Wiesner that went to Pennsylvania. It was his daughter. So they had a connection there. We find about 2 years later that they ended up in Pennsylvania at Foley, and then what would become Trexler Town. And at Trexler Town, later, another son, John, there's a lot of Johns and a lot of people, very difficult to get apart. But he petitioned the King of England to establish a tavern or house of entertainment, and that was granted to him. That structure, we were there many years ago when it still existed. It burned down, but they rebuilt it, kept the name of 1760 House because it was remodeled and enlarged in 1760, and still there. The reconstruction part. This would be before it burned down like this, and these pictures are from 20s and 30s. Things of interest. We have Jeremiah Trexler, and he's gone to. He's been elected to be the treasurer of the county of Easton and county of Northampton and Easton. So he moved from Trexler down to Easton for that, and later became one of the three commissioners in that area. But John did. Jeremiah was, we found out later he was an associator. We didn't know what an associator was, but apparently an associator in Pennsylvania was the same as a Minuteman in Massachusetts. And he and Ben Franklin didn't get along very well. And so we had a lot of correspondence. Of course, he didn't correspond. He didn't correspond because he apparently didn't care. But Ben Franklin did. Ben Franklin complained about it considerably because Franklin was put in charge of the militia, and he thought that the associators ought to be under him. And the associators weren't really a military group; they were a volunteer group, all volunteer, and they didn't take the direction. They did what they wanted. They went where they wanted, and that pretty much was his attitude. So we have a first description of the Trexler, and it's that he's Slav, independent, and not actually insubordinate. He disobeyed orders. He didn't even take the orders. So yeah, I guess it's pretty accurate. But later we find that Jeremiah petitioned the Pennsylvania governor to reinstate him as a captain in the militia. The petition is well acquainted with the Indian county. We find out that in the history of that county that well, it says that Mother Trexler was very friendly with the Indians and frequently presented them with gifts. And she baked bread for them, for which she was given in return wild skins of animals. And that's when shortly after that, he moved to the Eastern area. At the Eastern area, that's elected positions. He was also on the committee of safety, which corresponded with all the colonies pre-Revolutionary War, and then during the war. So it was quite active, and this is from the minutes of that committee of safety. We can find out that he was in charge of providing the Indians with sufficient provisions to give each Indian one his meal every morning and evening, and no more. That all shopkeepers, tavern keepers, and others be forbidden to dispense any liquor to the said Indians under the penalty of 50 pounds. So I imagine he still remains popular with the Indians. And as far as things of interest, I was interested in the Declaration of Independence because I knew that it was written on this December 4th, or written on December 4th, but first read on December 8th in Philadelphia. What I found out was that actually it was read in three places at noon on January 8th. One was Philadelphia. What's that? July. What did I say? January? July. And then it was written in Philadelphia. It was read in Trenton, New Jersey, and it was read in Easton, Pennsylvania. So I'm trying to base it on facts, but sometimes I just find it hard to believe in a small little place like Easton that he wasn't there. You know, the reading of the Declaration of Independence. Then we have an interesting person. It's very difficult. In many cases, to find out a lot about some of the women. That Laura has an interesting history, and one of the things that you put together, her story, you can read her story in at least 4 different versions of it. And so you have to sort through the Trexler version, there's a couple of Bauer family versions, and there's one for the DAR, and so if you just take the ones where they all agree and leave out, because some of them were written like 150 years later, and so this really gets a good story. But it's pretty good if you use the others. Susanna Bauer married John Hessler, and they had 5 children. And so during the Revolutionary War, the British Rangers came down from New York with the Iroquois, primarily scientists, and they captured, one of the people they captured was Susanna Bauer and her 5 children. She resisted, and they confronted her. They murdered her child and scalped her. And so she became complacent at that point. And so they took her off. She was a captive of the Indians for 7 years. When she escaped, she escaped with 2 of her children. So when she did that, she then came down and she married John Trexler. John Trexler had 5 grown children. His wife had died. They were married. They had 2 children, Israel and Jeremiah. So notice I said, whenever they're related, they're Catholics. And when Israel was about 5 years old, John Trexler died. And so Susanna then married John Lear. John Lear's wife had just died. He had 10 children. So if you add it together, Israel had 1 brother and 20 stepbrothers and sisters. That was interesting. And Susanna, she married to John Bauer, John Hessler, John Trexler, and John Lear. So and every couple of names. We found Israel. We had a lot of early information, but we didn't have, the only census record we had was that he was he listed his occupation as a line farmer. And if you're a line farmer, in central Pennsylvania, it's just hard to believe that you can grow lines, certainly on a commercial basis. And so with some investigation, we determined that what he did was he made lime from limestone. So we're not sure if that was just an interpretation by the census person or whether it was Israel's sense of humor that tweak this census person. But these are this is a picture of the limestones in a quarry down down here, and then this is a map that shows his 3 quarries that his house was up here. And we have a great description because they posted newspapers. When they sold, when he died, they sold the business. They sold his house. So you have a great description of the house and the dimensions and the barns and what was included. So it really, he had a son, Manuel Uriah, and we had a little bit of information about him, but he was tough. We couldn't find him in the census. We couldn't do anything. So, but he did have a son, Charles Lewis, and if you remember that name, the book will come back to that. One thing that we noticed there is that 2 sons, Franklin and Israel, died 2 days apart in August of 1849. And by looking at the newspapers, that there was a big cholera epidemic, so we're kind of assuming that they died of cholera. And then just 2 months later, that's when Charles Lewis was born. That's Charles. Charles and Emma. And in 1891, Charles left Pennsylvania to come to California to work between Jordan and Peru to head up the cement works that in Jordan. Photo is Charles with his favorite mule, Noah, Dennis Lewis. And that photograph is by George R. Brooks. And George Brooks will become, it just gets a lot of great books. George Brooks is a son-in-law of Charles Trexler. After Trexler was his wife, and he worked for Eastman Kodak, so he had a camera and product that needs and knives and photography. And it's Charles with his arm. And then this picture, that's Charles Lewis with his grandson, Bruce Brooks. And this photo, again by George Brooks, was entered into the New York newspaper for photo contest, and it won first prize. Prize was $5. And we have, of course, California, New York doesn't exist anymore, between Georgia and Peru, and really the New York Central is up there. We have the historical marker, which lists the incorrect dating, President date. And we know that it was it's 1891. One of the many reasons we know that is because on the side of the kilns we have the date 1891. These pictures are courtesy of Lynn Fall right here, Virginia. You got any questions about cement? We've been to the site several times, driven up and seen nothing but dense forest, and said there can't be anything there. And but it was nice to be nearby. About 3 months ago, we got an email from Lynn that the Friends of President Jordan Historical Society, something like that. And we have a mutual friend that said maybe you know something about this cement plant, because they ended up doing the talk that Jordan loved the cement industry, particularly this plant. And I said, oh, let's just report. And I got his personal information. So she's given me all these photos, and I sent her some of the things that I had. So we'll thank her for that. And as a matter of fact, I have a couple of the bricks over here and some bow ties that you can take a look at that are from that plant. The people that own that very gracious to get that to me. It was a large plant. It was really much larger than I thought. It was a 3-story building, and this is a winter scene of the cement plant. I got that picture from the Lehigh County Historical Association in Pennsylvania. This is one of the things that my mother said they called it the book of letters. And what it was it was their idea for copying to make a copy for the photocopies of any correspondence that they had or the reports that went back to the home office. And they would wet the paper, put a blotter underneath it, put this lid paper with just like onion skin on top of it, put a blotter on top of that, close the book, put it in the press, and that made your copy. This would be one of the reports you can see. It wasn't always the neatest operation, but I particularly like this one. This one being in 10 hours and 17 and a half cents per hour, and the night man 11 hours is 12 and a half cents. So I hope that was a good wage stuff. We'd like to see. Another paper that it had was January 6, 1896, letter to Charles from the home office, and it gives you instructions for what they were expecting to get for different reports. I really like it because it gives the seal for the Egypt brand cement that they did and the Union brand that they made there. It lists the Jordan Portland Cement Works there, and if I get it wrong, it's because I can't read it here. And I notice the address is just copy York. But one of my favorite is just the bell symbol. So in 1896, they had phones, and you didn't need to bother this phone number because you just pulled up the Weber and said, give him. And somehow they went to the major thing. But I guess I don't think 1896, I don't think it was phone being very, very prevalent. And I cannot read that. I'll let you read it. This is the 66th anniversary for Charles and Emma. And part of it, right up to their anniversary, was about the cement works and what they had to do. But that's true that the reporter got everything quite right about the manufacturing, but you get the gist of it. The part that really got me was the part down at the bottom where it says that it was done. It was they dismantled all the wooden buildings and took them away, and just leave the kilns as a monument. But here's a picture of the clay pits, an aerial photograph. And here is another aerial photograph. The kilns, you'll see the trees sticking out, and kind of give you a relationship. This is the 2 blocks of kilns with 6 kilns in each one. So this is what it looks like today. Then took some great pictures of that. And that's a pile of marl and clay, which that's what they were digging there in that swampy area. That's a large quantity of it, and that's what they were making cement from. And that's a Lehigh Firework Company version. There's one right over here you can take a look at. There's you can see the relationship of the two films, and that was all cement they had that they had each all around the film. That's inventory. And I thought I was going to be able to read it. So we have the 12 kilns here, and the clay, marl, coal,
the buckwheat, just different things. I know the headline is also, buckwheat, they had to use lamps in there, and just very simple. This is, would be a picture of a bag of, cement. I got this to Lee, I probably, off the general Harry Trexler exhibit at the Historical Museum. And, because it was the same brand, it probably would have said, Georgia, New York, rather than in Egypt, but, that's the bags. You know, some of the shipping barrels, some of the bags. This inventory from 1902 is pretty much the same type of material. The one big difference is down here, where it talks about they had 5 millstones, and that might have been one of them. The store owned he displayed that in his front yard. These are bow ties, and the bow ties, then just figured out, were a form of quality control. So if you took the bow ties, I imagine if you put a clamp over here and a clamp over here, you fold, you can tell what its breaking strength is. And so if it didn't break, whatever the number was, if it didn't break at 5,000 pounds, it was good. If it broke before that, then that badge wasn't any good. And a lot of these, you can read dates on the you can see that. This is a picture by George Brooks, and it's a picture of Charles Lewis in front of the kilns. Now we can see the kilns, we can see the stacks that have since fallen down, and the tall chimneys in the background. And then behind that, the middle tree would be the other kiln. So it gives us a good idea of what the ruins would have looked like when they were set up. This is the picture of that tall chimney that we've been looking at. And this is later on, they built a causeway through the swamp and put the railroad tracks so you could come from the New York Central right into the plant. And then we have assessments for the value of the plant that we had there. And then on the internet, we found a picture of that James Brooks lived and holding a brick, and it was an expedition that he made, and we found out later that he did with his sister. We tried, particularly my brother, was very interested in trying to find more pictures by George Brooks to see if it had any. So we tried to find the family that he had any access. We been in contact with Liz. We asked if she had any. She didn't, but she looked and she found 2 more siblings. And so we had a bigger family tree to go and search. Bob did find, I think it was on Facebook, he found somebody with a name that sounded like it might work. So he emailed him and said who he was, what we were looking for, and we didn't hear from him, but what he did, and that was his cousin John Brooks. He did real estate in Georgia. He got in touch with his cousin in Baltimore, who immediately called us and said, yes, I got all sorts of Brooks history,
and he had a picture that we broke. But, and so he sent us some pictures, and really good pictures. And this is, oh, he had all the stuff, he had a box, and it was just labeled Trexler. We never opened it. It didn't mean much to me. And so when he opened it, from some of these pictures and that, and so also, in the instant that I had this other piece of paper. And if you remember, Man of Uriah, that we didn't have much information for, this is handwritten biography that he made. And so it tells about his early life, and then it lists every job. Well, I saw every job because there's just a list of jobs. He built railroad bridges. He was a superintendent, and so we went from one job to the other. That's probably because he moved around so much, we had trouble finding him. But he named the railroad, the bridge, and the street that went over. That's attached to 4 more pieces of paper. We don't know what's on the other 4. We're still trying to get together with them, but that's only been like the last 3 weeks. We've had, yeah. But one of the bridges that he had, because now we've got another clue, we can take it further, was the Kansakwa and pulled up, but you don't say. Baldwinsville Railroad, air bridge, and that's one of the ones that he has listed, almost 400 feet long and 104 feet high. And so I'm sure we could go on with the fight, more pictures of that, but that's kind of what makes it exciting, because it keeps changing and we keep adding things. With the plan, also there was also what was called, and the pictures that I had was called the cement farm. And this picture is of the cement farm. You can see the canal, and here with the buggy, that's Charles Unama. This apparently the famous old elm trees, and I should start counting all these people because they have 11 kids. I'm kind of curious if that's every kid, but it's got to be every horse and cows that they own. Down here, it's a bicycle, and my favorite is this robo. You don't quite think about it, because barely be up one side or the other when they bridge. So the problem with couldn't travel here along the footpath, but if you want to get to the other side, yeah, it's definitely that was a good way. For the cement farm that we had the farm record, and it shows that the loads of hay and then the bundles of oats, wheat, and rye that they were gotten from that. And that was they had some workers for sales, and that's down here. And this would be that same farm. That's the elm tree there. You can see the kilns in the background, and those 2 people, the big migrant parents, Miles and Eddie Trexler. The left would be a picture of young Emma, and on the right is Emma with her grandchildren. That's my uncle Kenny that she's holding, and my dad do something unfortunate. And I know there's a bunch of people here that your grandfather, my grandfather were twins, and this is their picture, and they had to be less than a year old because it was taken in Allentown before they left.
It's Charles Orlando and Miles Warren. And there's a picture of Miles and Charles, they're a little older, and then Charles and Miles with their brother to the center there, their oldest brother, Arthur. And we had Charles and Miles holding myself and my brothers, twins, at our baptism. So, the generations together. And I know that's our brother and I. And twins just skip the generation. And so they skipped another generation. And they're in the back. It's just Catholic. That's it. I got, I think most everybody here has done it, but if there's anybody that isn't giving me a genealogy, we're trying to put together a genealogy for all the descendants, Charles and Emma. It'll be similar to the John Moore book, only much narrower, even though it will get big at the end. And if you haven't, I've got a sheet up to I'd like it to fill out. Several of you brought these things. It did. And I'll open up for any questions that anybody might have. There were quite a few progressions that just changed. It primarily did because it was Trexler, Germany.
Right.
When they got to Rotterdam, the Dutch were in charge of doing the names. So it's kind of what they heard.
Probably what.
And the record we saw there was Trexler, but there's other records, you know, it gets tricky. You gotta go around. When they got to England, and they had some variations there.
Sure.
For the name, and even when we got to the United States or to America, their Trexler seemed to come back with Trexler, and it may be because the Germans, some of the Germans were doing the recording, and they recorded it that way. Now, once they got to Pennsylvania, I don't know how it got changed to Trexler, but it was Trexler, Benjamin Franklin had a tough time. He spelled it 3 or 4 different ways. And somehow when it got to Trexler, then it stayed there.
Yeah.
And then the top got named that way. And that seems that. So it's pretty unusual. If it's spelled that way, we'll probably relate. I'm told that it means Woodturner German, so, you know, it could be that there's other, but.
Yeah.
But, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.